Let's jump right into this explainer, because today we're looking at a source text that honestly reads like an ancient fable. I mean, it is just overflowing with magic, bitter betrayal, and this profoundly satisfying quest for ultimate justice. We're going to break down the incredible tale of a humble prayer bead maker, a mystical being from the desert, and a royal court where the truth is, quite literally, forced into the light. And this isn't just some story about magic. It's really a deep dive into human nature, the destructive power of greed, and the incredible, undeniable power of pure intentions. So let's dive right in and see how this timeless narrative actually unfolds. Our source material centers on a 17-year-old boy named Yakub. Now, Yakub was orphaned at the tender age of 7 after a plague swept through his village, and he was taken in by his uncle's family. But as the text describes, this new home was definitely no paradise. He was constantly belittled and abused by his aunt Zubaida and his cousin Shakir. But Yakub, he survives his harsh reality by clinging to this really powerful piece of advice his mother gave him right before she passed away. She told him, "When the world tries to break you, wear silence, because in silence you can hear Allah's voice." It's such a heavy quote, and it perfectly sets the emotional and spiritual tone for our protagonist. He doesn't fight back with anger. Instead, he just channels all of that resilience directly into his craft. And this sets up a really stark contrast between our hero and his main rival. So, Yakub inherits the art of making tesbihs, prayer beads, from his late father. He works late into the night using these simple, cheap date pits, polishing them until they literally look like pearls. And he does all of this while praying that whoever holds them finds genuine peace. Then he just sells them for pennies at the local market. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we have Haji Nawab. Haji is your classic wealthy, greedy merchant. He sells cheap beads at exorbitant prices by outright lying to his customers, claiming they're imported from holy cities. Well, as Yakub's pure-hearted beads start bringing actual peace to the townsfolk, Haji Nawab's business absolutely plummets. And as you might expect, a dangerous, burning jealousy takes root in the merchant's heart. Which brings us right to the inciting incident of our story. Yakub's aunt essentially forces him to travel across a brutal desert to a neighboring town, Ramlabad, just to buy cheap date pits. He sets out in the morning, successfully buys his supplies by noon, and starts the long trek back. But in the afternoon, he encounters this exhausted, desperately thirsty traveler. In a completely selfless act, Yakub gives away his only water skin. I mean, he just hands it over. So as night falls, the desert temperature absolutely plummets. Yakub is totally lost, he's freezing, and he's just stumbling through the sand under a sky full of stars. Right when things are looking incredibly grim in this desolate landscape, the source text introduces a massive supernatural twist. Yakub hears this faint voice pleading for help from behind a sand dune. When he goes to investigate, he finds a girl in white clothing with a face as pale as the moon and eyes shining like stars. But, and this is a big but, she isn't human. This is Marjana. She is a believing jinn, and she's been trapped in this barren desert for 3 whole days, pinned underneath this bizarre glowing stone by a cruel leader of her tribe named Shaban. Why? Simply because she dared to speak out against his tyranny. Now, this brilliantly illustrates the magical mechanics of the world we're analyzing here. Marjana explains the condition of her trap, and it turns out this glowing stone is no ordinary rock. If a person tries to lift it with even an ounce of greed or selfish desire in their heart, the stone will become exponentially heavier and literally crush them. It can only be moved by a purely selfless human. So Yakub, who is terrified but just deeply empathetic, steps up. He places his hands on this massive, glowing boulder, and because his intentions are entirely pure, he lifts it as easily as a ball of cotton. He just tosses it aside and frees this mystical being. No big deal, right? Overwhelmed with gratitude, Marjana actually makes Yakub her spiritual brother. And right before vanishing into the night air, leaving behind this lingering scent of roses and sandalwood, she hands him a small, radiant bead. She tells him to incorporate this divine gift into his tasbihs, making it the imam, the master bead right at the top. And she gives him a promise. If he is ever in dire need, he only has to hold it and call her name 3 times. It's basically a magical emergency contact. So the crucial point here is what happens when Yakub actually returns to the market with this new, divinely imbued tasbih. The results are nothing short of miraculous. The source text describes an old man holding the beads and immediately breaking down in tears, finally finding the courage to repent for a 20-year-old sin. A desperate mother places the beads near her sick baby, and the child's fever breaks that very evening. Word spreads like wildfire. Yakub's humble little market spot is suddenly flooded with people seeking peace. which, of course, absolutely pushes his rival, Haji Nawab, over the edge. And this brings us to a really devastating sequence of events. Driven entirely by malice, Haji Nawab approaches Yaqub's own Aunt Zubaida and bribes her with silver coins to uncover Yaqub's secret. Next, Zubaida tasks her son Shakir to spy on Yaqub. Shakir sees the glowing bead in the dead of night and reports back that Yaqub is using some sort of magic stone. And then, wow, while Yaqub sleeps, his own aunt creeps into his room and steals his most prized possession, the tasbih containing Marjana's gift. She hands it straight over to Haji Nawab, who immediately takes it to the royal authorities, framing this innocent orphan for using dark witchcraft to brainwash the public. Just incredibly cruel. The shift in Yaqub's fortune here is just sudden and violent. Without any warning, royal soldiers kick down his uncle's door. Yaqub is arrested, accused of black magic and leading the public astray. But he isn't just arrested. He's bound in heavy chains and dragged behind horses for 3 agonizing days all the way to the capital city to face the Sultan. The text paints a really grim picture. He is starved, he's dehydrated, and eventually he's thrown into a rotting, dark, rat-infested dungeon deep beneath the palace. Imagine being in that pitch-black cell, battered, bruised. Yaqub truly hits rock bottom. But instead of screaming in anger or cursing his fate, he just looks up at the stone ceiling and says, "Ya Allah, if my death is your will, I accept. If you wish to save me, only you can." He actually finds peace in his absolute faith. And it's only then that he remembers Marjana's promise. Even though he doesn't physically have the stolen bead in his hands anymore, he realizes that true connection doesn't require physical objects. So he closes his eyes and whispers her name 3 times. Instantly, that familiar scent of rose and sandalwood fills the foul dungeon, and Marjana appears. But seeing Yaqub's battered state, she is furious. She immediately offers to just tear down the prison walls and personally separate Haji Nawab's head from his shoulders. But Yaqub shows incredible restraint here. He actually stops her. He explains that if she uses force, the people will only believe he truly was the evil wizard they claimed he was. He completely refuses revenge, asking only for a way that the truth can reveal itself naturally in the Sultan's court. Marjana smiles at his pure heart and heals his wounds with a single touch, promising that she will set a trap for the liars the very next morning. Which brings us right to the brink of the climax. In a royal court filled with incredibly powerful men, will the truth be completely buried by malicious lies, or will justice actually prevail for a powerless orphan? Fast forward to the next morning, and the courtroom is packed. Sultan Abdul Rahman is sitting on his throne. Haji Nawab is front and center, holding the stolen tasbih, just confidently spewing lies about Yaqub's demonic magic. Yaqub's aunt Zubaida has even been summoned as a witness. Yaqub, standing there in chains, simply states that the bead was a gift of gratitude, not dark magic. So the Sultan, who is depicted as a very wise man, decides on a definitive test. He commands the royal judge to bring out an ancient, holy Quran, demanding that Haji Nawab place his hand on it and swear to God that the boy is a wizard. And this is exactly where the tension finally breaks. Haji Nawab approaches, sweating profusely at this point. But the very second he tries to place his hand on the holy book, a massive, unseen force just stops him. His hand is instantly paralyzed. It's like he hit an invisible brick wall. He physically cannot touch the book. Terrified by this undeniable divine intervention, his knees completely buckle. He collapses to the floor and just loudly confesses everything: his jealousy, the bribe, the theft, all the lies. Seeing this, Aunt Zubaida also falls to the ground weeping and confessing her part in betraying her own nephew. The truth literally forced its way out. The truth is finally out. The Sultan is deeply moved and realizes he was this close to executing an innocent boy based entirely on rumors. He immediately frees Yaqub, offers him a grand public apology, and then offers him immense wealth. We're talking gold, a palace, and the highly esteemed title of royal vizier. But Yaqub, he refuses all of it. He tells the Sultan that true wealth is a pure heart. Instead of riches for himself, he makes a single, beautifully selfless request: that the Sultan build a Dar al-Yatim, an orphanage, so that no other vulnerable person in the kingdom ever has to suffer the way he did. The Sultan is amazed and instantly agrees to this. But what happens next is honestly probably the most powerful moment in the entire source text. The Sultan asks Yaqub what should be done with Haji Nawab and Aunt Zubaida. Yaqub, showcasing this
really radical empathy, forgives them completely. He says they're all sinners in need of mercy. This act of sheer grace completely breaks Haji Nawab's heart. Weeping, the once greedy merchant publicly repents and announces he's donating his entire fortune to fund Yaqub's new orphanage. Yaqub even embraces the aunt who sold him out, thanking her for giving him a roof when he was small. Just incredible.
The narrative wraps up with Yaqub living a long, peaceful life, teaching a whole new generation of orphans his craft. But let's step back for a second and really break down the core lessons this source text leaves us with. First, selfless help opens doors we can't even see, just as Yaqub helping the jinn saved his own life later on. Second, jealousy inevitably burns the jealous, which is perfectly demonstrated by Haji Nawab's complete self-destruction. Third, no matter how dark it gets, the truth always finds a way to prevail. And finally, ultimately, true wealth isn't gold or fancy titles, it is a pure heart and sincere intentions.
Years later, when people would ask an elderly Yaqub what the magic secret was behind his incredibly peaceful life and his beautiful craft, he would simply smile and say, "The secret isn't magic. It's just the purity of intention." And I think that leaves us with a really provocative question for our own lives. In a world that is so completely obsessed with acquiring external wealth and status, how much time are we actually spending polishing the intentions of our own hearts? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll see you next time.